He's hurting me. It was written in shaking black eyeliner. On a stained cocktail napkin. She slipped it into the cashmere pocket. Praying for a miracle. The man who found it wasn't a cop. He was a kingmaker. And he didn't call the precinct. He called his cleaner. Subscribe and hit that bell because you have no idea how far this goes or what it costs. The silence inside the Vance estate was the kind that suffocated. Elara Vance sat perfectly still at the edge of the master bed, blood blooming against the silk of her emerald evening gown. The gala had been an hour ago. The cameras had flashed. Marcus had smiled, his arm clamped tight around her waist like a vice. But the moment the heavy oak doors of their mansion sealed shut, the smile had vanished, replaced by a backhand that sent her crashing into the marble foyer. "You spoke out of turn," Marcus said, pouring himself a scotch from the crystal decanter across the room. The mayor asked a question about the new harbor development. "I answer those questions, Elara." "You look pretty and you nod." Elara didn't touch the cut on her cheek. 2 years of marriage had taught her that crying only extended the punishment. She looked at the floor, counting the patterns in the rug, waiting for him to leave. "Clean yourself up," Marcus sneered, adjusting his cufflinks. "I'm meeting the board for cigars. I want you asleep when I get back, or we'll finish this." The door clicked shut. The electronic lock engaged with a final, digital chirp. Elara let out a ragged breath. She moved to the bathroom mirror, ignoring the throbbing pain in her jaw. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out her phone. It was completely dark. Marcus had installed a jamming signal on the property months ago. He controlled who she spoke to, where she went, and what she saw. But tonight, at the charity gala coat check, she had made a move. She had written a single, desperate plea on a napkin and slipped it into the coat of Police Commissioner Davies, hoping, praying, that a man sworn to protect would do just that. 6 miles away, in the private suite of the Obsidian Club, Julian "Viper" Rossi stood by a humidor, holding a stained cocktail napkin between his tailored fingers. He was a man composed of sharp angles and colder logic, the undisputed head of the Rossi syndicate, which controlled half the city's real estate and all of its secrets. Matteo, a mountain of a man covered in ink, leaned against the doorframe. "Problem, boss?" "A mistake," Julian said. His voice smooth and devoid of warmth. "Someone slipped this into my coat at the gala." He tossed the napkin onto the glass table. Matteo read it and grunted. "Wrong pocket. Probably meant for Davies. He was standing next to you at the check. Toss it." "Domestic issues aren't our business." Julian looked out the penthouse window, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights. Normally, Matteo was right. But the scent on the napkin, a rare, custom-blended jasmine, belonged to only one woman at that gala. Elara Vance. The wife of Marcus Vance, the billionaire developer currently building 3 massive skyscrapers right in the middle of Julian's territory. Skyscrapers that Julian's inspectors had recently discovered were built with subpar, dangerously cheap materials. "It's not domestic, Matteo," Julian said, his gaze hardening. It's 30 minutes later, the security gate of the Vance estate sparked and died. The electronic lock on the front door didn't even slow Matteo down, a specialized scrambling device popped it open in 4 seconds. Julian stepped into the foyer, his Italian leather shoes silent against the marble. He found Elara sitting on the floor of the master suite, clutching her ribs. She looked up, her eyes widening in sheer terror as she recognized him. You're Julian Ross." "The mob boss. I prefer businessmen," Julian said, offering her a hand. He didn't pull her up, he waited for her to take it. "You meant to give that napkin to the commissioner." A bold move, considering Marcus pays for the commissioner's boat. Elara froze. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The police wouldn't have saved her, they would have handed her right back to Marcus. "Come with me, Mrs. Vance," Julian said quietly. "Or stay here and wait for him." "I don't force anyone." Elara looked at the door, then at the man offering her a way out of the cage. She took his hand. The safe house was a minimalist penthouse in the financial district. For 3 days, Elara slept, ate, and healed under the watchful eye of Julian's private medical team. On the 4th day, Julian sat across from her at the dining table, a manila folder resting between them. "Marcus is looking for you," Julian said, sliding a tablet across the table. On the screen, Marcus was holding a press conference, fake tears in his eyes, begging for information on his kidnapped wife. "He's a monster," Elara whispered, her hands trembling. "He's worse than a monster," Julian corrected. "He's a thief. My men have been looking into his new harbor development. The concrete is diluted. The steel is cheap. The buildings are death traps waiting to happen. If they collapse in my territory, it brings federal heat on my operations." Elara stared at him, and suddenly, the trembling stopped. A sharp, dangerous light flickered in her eyes. She reached for the manila folder. "You're missing something, Mr. Rossi," Julian raised an eyebrow. I'm a structural engineer," Elara said, her voice dropping the victimhood entirely. "I didn't just design those buildings. I found out where the money went. Marcus isn't just cutting corners to save a few bucks. He's funneling $50 million of cartel drug money through those construction costs to wash it." Julian went completely still. The cartel. A direct rival, moving money through his city, under his nose, using a billionaire as a shield. "And here is the real problem," Elara continued, leaning forward, the bruised wife completely replaced by a cold tactician. "I didn't mean to give the napkin to the commissioner. I've known he was corrupt for a year." Julian's eyes narrowed. "You aimed for my pocket." "Yes," Elara said firmly. "Because you're the only man in this city with enough power, and enough ego, to tear Marcus down. You want to stop the cartel from owning your skyline? I have the encrypted flash drive with every single financial transfer. But you don't get it until Marcus is in a cell. And I have my freedom." Julian stared at the woman sitting across from him. The city had always thought Marcus Vance was the genius. They were wrong. The genius was the woman he had been locking in a bedroom. "Matteo," Julian called out without breaking eye contact with Elara. "Prepare the men. We're going to pay Mr. Vance a visit. And call Detective Lynn at Financial Crimes. Tell her we're serving her the bust of a lifetime on a silver platter." The confrontation happened at the construction site. Marcus was standing amidst the scaffolding, screaming at a foreman, when a fleet of black SUVs rolled onto the dirt. Julian stepped out, flanked by Matteo and 20 armed men. But it wasn't Julian who made Marcus turn pale. It was Elara, stepping out of the car, wearing a sharp blazer, looking him dead in the eye. "Elara," Marcus stammered, his bravado instantly collapsing as he saw the men surrounding him. "What is this?" "This is a divorce, Marcus," Elara said coldly. Before Marcus could run, police sirens wailed in the distance. Detective Lynn's cruiser tore through the gates. Julian handed Lynn the flash drive Elara had provided. The evidence was irrefutable. The cartel money, the compromised structural integrity, the physical abuse. Marcus dropped to his knees in the dirt. The empire he built on lies crumbling around him. 2 months later, Elara stood in the lobby of her newly established engineering firm, entirely funded by a quiet, anonymous donation. The door chimed, and Julian Rossi walked in, carrying a single white rose. "The buildings are being demolished tomorrow," Julian said, handing her the flower. "Your blueprints for the new development have been approved by the city. It seems we're going to be neighbors." Elara smiled, a genuine, powerful expression. "Just remember, Mr. Rossi. I design things that last. I don't cut corners." Julian returned the smile, a rare, genuine crack in his icy armor. "Neither do I, Elara. Neither do I." She aimed for the monster. But she hit the king. If you loved this story of vengeance and strategy, smash that like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments if you would have had the nerve to play the Mafia boss. See you in the next one. would you like me to expand on any specific chapter of this new script or refine the dialogue for a particular? The silence in Julian Viper Rossi's safe house wasn't the suffocating, terrifying quiet of the Vance estate. It was the silence of a loaded gun. Elara sat across from Julian, the manila folder and the encrypted flash drive resting on the glass table between them. She had just confessed to orchestrating her own rescue by dropping the napkin in the pocket of the city's most lethal syndicate boss. She was playing a high-stakes game of chess, and she had just sacrificed her queen to put the king in check. Julian didn't blink. He picked up the silver flash drive, turning it slowly in the ambient light of the penthouse. $50 million, he murmured, his voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. The Navarro cartel is running $50 million through my city, under my nose, using your husband's skyscrapers as the washing machine, not just his skyscrapers, Elara corrected, her voice steady despite the bruised ribs wrapped tightly under her. Her borrowed sweater. My designs. Marcus used my blueprints to secure the city permits, then gutted the structural integrity to hide the cash flow. If those towers go up, they will eventually come down. And when they do, hundreds of people will die. Mateo, standing like a tattooed sentinel by the door, let out a low whistle. Boss, if the cartel is backing Vance, taking him out isn't just a local dispute. It's a declaration of war against the southern border. Julian finally looked up, his dark eyes locking onto Elara. He was searching for a crack in her composure, a sign of the terrified, battered wife the city thought she was. He found none. He found only the cold, calculated fury of a woman who had spent 2 years building her own cage so she could learn how to pick the lock. You brought a war to my doorstep, Mrs. Vance, Julian said softly. I brought you the winning hand, Mr. Rossi, Elara countered, leaning forward. Marcus is weak. He's a narcissist playing at being a gangster. The cartel doesn't respect him, they use him. If you expose the structural flaws and hand the money trail over to the feds, Marcus takes the fall, the cartel loses their pipeline, and you save your skyline. Julian's lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. And what do you get out of this? My life back, Elara said, the ice in her voice finally cracking to reveal the raw, burning vengeance beneath. And I want to watch him lose everything. 6 miles away, the illusion of Marcus Vance was unraveling. Marcus stood in the center of his massive, empty walk-in closet, tearing through velvet-lined drawers. Silk ties and Rolex watches hit the hardwood floor. He was sweating through his bespoke shirt, his usually perfectly styled hair falling into his eyes in frantic clumps. The hidden wall safe was open. It was completely empty. The flash drive was gone, sir. The timid voice of his head of security echoed from the hallway. The police are downstairs. Detective Lin is asking to speak with you regarding your wife's disappearance. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, forcing his heart rate down. He had to play the game. He had to be the grieving, desperate billionaire. He adjusted his collar, wiped the sweat from his brow, and marched down the sweeping staircase. Detective Sarah Lynn was waiting in the foyer. She wore a rumpled trench coat and an expression that suggested she hadn't slept since 2024. She held a notepad, tapping a cheap pen against the cover. She had been trying to build a fraud case against Marcus for 3 years, but his political connections always buried her files. Detective, Marcus said, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. Tell me you have something. Tell me you found Elara. Lynn didn't offer a comforting smile. She looked at the smashed vase in the corner of the room, then back to Marcus's bruised knuckles. We're checking traffic cams, Mr. Vance. But I have to ask, was there a dispute before the gala? A reason she might have left on her own? My wife is unwell, Detective, Marcus said, dropping his voice to a hushed, tragic whisper. She has severe anxiety. She gets confused. I'm terrified someone took advantage of her out there, right? Lynn said, scribbling a note. Unwell. Funny, she seemed perfectly coherent when she filed those flawless zoning permits last month. We'll be in touch, Marcus. Don't leave the city. As Lynn walked out the door, her instincts screamed. Marcus wasn't a grieving husband, he was a terrified rat backed into a corner. Back at the penthouse, Julian plugged Elara's flash drive into a secure, offline terminal. Lines of code and encrypted banking data flooded the screen. It's a biometric lock, Julian noted, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The cartel funds are frozen in an escrow account. They can't be moved to the construction firm without a dual signature authorization, Marcus's thumbprint, and mine, Elara confirmed. He made me a co-signer on the holding company to double his legal buffer. Without me, he can't access the 50 million. By tomorrow morning, the cartel is going to want to know why their money isn't moving. Julian leaned back in his leather chair, the glow of the monitors casting sharp shadows across his face. The structural engineer hadn't just escaped her abuser, she had seized the detonator to his entire empire. Matteo, Julian commanded, his tone shifting into the undeniable authority of a syndicate king. Put a detail on Detective Lynn. She's going to start digging, and Marcus will try to bury her when she gets too close. And contact our friends at the port. Tell them the Rossi family is officially cutting ties with any Vance-owned property. Julian stood up and walked over to Elara. He reached out, not to grab her, but to gently place a burner phone on the table in front of her. The board is set, Elara. By sunrise, Marcus will realize he is out of time. He will send the cartel's hounds into the streets to find you. Julian looked down at her, a profound respect settling in his dark eyes. Are you ready to burn your husband's world to the ground? Elara picked up the phone, her hand completely steady. I brought the matches, Julian. First move to eliminate Detective Lynn, forcing Julian and Matteo to step out of the shadows. The rain over the city was thick and greasy, clinging to the windshield of Detective Sarah Lynn's battered sedan. She sat in the darkness outside a nondescript construction warehouse on the edge of the harbor, the glow of a single cigarette illuminating the frustration etched into her. She had been staring at the Vance Harbor development files for 4 hours. The math didn't add up. The tonnage of steel ordered didn't match the structural load requirements for a 60-story tower. Marcus Vance was building a graveyard in the sky, and he was doing it with money that didn't exist on any. Come on, Marcus, she whispered, tapping her pen against the steering wheel. Where is the leak? A sudden movement in her rearview mirror made the hair on her neck stand up. A black SUV, lights cut, had drifted into the alley behind her. Then another pulled up across the street, boxing her in. Lynn didn't reach for her radio. She knew her precinct was leaked. If she called for backup, she'd likely be calling her own executioners. She reached for her service weapon instead. Before she could chamber around, a man in a tactical mask shattered her driver's side window. The glass exploded inward. Lynn ducked, kicking the door open with all her strength, sending the attacker reeling. She rolled onto the wet pavement, leveling her gun at the figures emerging from the SUVs. These weren't Marcus's polished security guards. These were professionals, Navarro cartel sicarios. The flash drive, detective, one of them rasped, his accent thick and cold. Give us the drive, and you live through the night. I don't have it, Lynn spat, firing a shot that clipped the brickwork near his head. The return fire was a deafening roar of automatic weapons. Lynn scrambled behind a concrete pillar, the world dissolving into sparks and flying stone. She was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and seconds away from being a headline. Then, the alley erupted. A heavy, customized armored SUV slammed into the lead cartel vehicle at 60 miles per hour, flipping it like a toy. From the shadows of the warehouse roof, a red laser dot appeared on the lead gunman's chest. A single suppressed crack echoed through the rain, and the man dropped. Matteo stepped out from behind a stack of shipping containers, a submachine gun held with casual, terrifying ease. He didn't say a word. He simply opened fire, his movements a brutal, efficient dance of lead. Julian Rossi stepped out from the armored SUV, his black overcoat snapping in the wind. He didn't duck. He didn't run. He walked toward Detective Lynn as if he were strolling through a garden. Detective, Julian said, his voice cutting through the gunfire. You're making a mess of my neighborhood. Lynn stared at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Rossi. What the hell are you doing here? Saving your life, Julian replied, extending a hand to pull her up. Because Elara Vance told me you were the only honest cop left in this city. And because Marcus just made the mistake of letting the cartel onto my streets. Back at the penthouse, Elara watched the silent feed from the city's traffic cameras on Julian's monitors. She saw the flashes of gunfire, the chaos at the harbor. Her hands were clenched so tight her knuckles were white, but her eyes were fixed on the data. She wasn't just watching a rescue, she was watching the collapse of Marcus's safety net. By sending the cartel to kill a detective, Marcus had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The burner phone on the table buzzed. Unknown caller. Elara picked it up. She didn't say hello. I know you're with him, Elara. Marcus's voice came through the line, stripped of its billionaire charm. He sounded like a man drowning. I know Rossi has you. Do you have any idea what they'll do to you? To us? The Navarro people, they don't lose 50 million and walk away. They didn't lose it, Marcus, Elara said, her voice a low, dangerous silk. I took it. And I'm not with Rossi because he caught me. I'm with him because I chose him. He's a shark, Marcus. But you? You're just bait. I'll give you anything, Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. The houses, the offshore accounts I have in Zurich, just come back and sign the authorization. They're going to kill me, Elara. Then I suppose you should start praying, Elara said. Because the only thing I'm signing is your arrest warrant. She ended the call and looked at the monitor. Julian was leaning against his SUV, talking to a stunned Detective Lynn. He looked up, directly into the camera lens, as if he knew she was watching. He tapped his watch. The clock was ticking. The morning sun would bring the feds, the auditors, and the end of the Vance legacy. The top floor of the Vance Plaza was a monument to ego. 11 p.m., and the glass and steel needle pierced the low-hanging clouds of Philadelphia. Inside, the air was pressurized, silent, and smelled of expensive floor wax. The physical ledger is in the floor safe, beneath the model of the harbor development, Elara whispered, her voice crackling through Julian's earpiece. She wasn't in the safe house anymore. She was sitting in the back of Julian's armored SUV, parked 3 blocks away, her fingers flying across a laptop. She had bypassed the building's internal security. Looping the camera feed so the guard saw only empty hallways. I see it, Julian replied. He moved through the shadows of Marcus's executive office like a ghost. Matteo was at the door, his eyes fixed on the hallway. Julian knelt by the architectural model. It was a perfect, 1/50 scale replica of the towers Elara had designed, the towers that were currently stuffed with cartel cash and hollowed-out concrete. He moved the plastic crane, and a silent motor whirred. The model slid back, revealing a heavy biometric safe. Matteo, the bypass, Julian commanded. Matteo stepped forward, attaching a small, humming device to the safe's keypad. 30 seconds, boss. This tech is older than I thought. Marcus is getting cheap. He's not cheap, Elara's voice cut in, sharp and focused. He's desperate. Julian, move faster. I'm seeing a massive spike in the building's power grid. He's not calling the police. He's activating the fire suppression system, but the chemical levels are wrong. Julian froze. Explain. The suppression tanks in the mechanical floor aren't filled with foam, Elara said, her breath hitching. I found a secondary blueprint. Marcus installed a series of thermite charges in the support columns. He's going to accidentally demolish the evidence, the building, and anyone inside it, Matteo. Julian snapped, click. The safe door swung open. Julian grabbed a leather-bound book, the True Ledger, and shoved it into his jacket. We're leaving, Julian said. They reached the elevator bank, but the digital display was dead. The building groaned, a deep, metallic shriek that vibrated through the soles of their shoes. He cut the lifts, Matteo growled, pulling his sidearm. Stairs, too slow, Elara shouted over the comms. The charges are set for the central stairwell first to trap people on the upper floors. You have to go to the construction gantry on the north face. I'm taking control of the external lift now." Julian and Matteo sprinted down the hallway as the first explosion rocked the building. The floor tilted. A wall of heat chased them as the office they had just left vanished in a plume of white-hot dust. They burst through the glass of the north-facing windows, stepping onto the metal grating of the construction lift just as it began to descend. "Hold on!" Elara yelled. The lift plummeted. Above them, the top 3 floors of Vance Plaza erupted in a synchronized sequence of fire. Shrapnel whistled past Julian's head. At the bottom, the lift slammed into the ground. Julian and Matteo rolled off just as the SUV roared toward them. The door swung open, and Elara was there, her face illuminated by the fire reflecting off the car's windows. "Get in." As they sped away, Julian looked back. The top of the building was a torch against the night sky. In the middle of the street, standing by a silver sports car, was Marcus. He was watching his empire burn, a remote detonator still clutched in his shaking hand. He looked like a man who thought he had finally won. Until Julian stepped out of the moving SUV, Julian didn't draw his gun. He simply held up the leather-bound ledger. "The fire was a nice touch, Marcus," Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm against the roar of the sirens. "But you forgot one thing about architects. They always keep a backup." Marcus stared at the book, his face draining of all color. He looked at Elara, who was standing beside Julian, her jaw set, her spirit finally unbroken. "It's over, Marcus," she said. The police, led by a very alive and very angry Detective Lynn, swarmed. Chapter 5, The Architecture of a New World. The courtroom was as cold as the concrete Marcus had used to build his hollow empire. For 6 weeks, the city had been captivated by the trial of the century. The golden boy of Philadelphia real estate sat behind a defense table, his expensive suit hanging off a frame that had withered under the weight of federal indictments. Elara sat in the front row, her back straight, wearing a suit of charcoal gray. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like the woman who had drafted the blueprints for his destruction. Detective Sarah Lynn stood at the witness stand, presenting the ledger Julian had pulled from the fire. "The data is absolute," Lynn testified, her voice echoing in the silent chamber. "Every offshore transfer, every diluted concrete order, and every bribe paid to the Navarro cartel is documented here." In Marcus Vance's own handwriting, when the verdict came down, life without the possibility of parole, Marcus didn't scream. He didn't even look up. He was already a ghost, haunted by the $50 million he couldn't touch and the wife he couldn't break. As the bailiffs led him away in shackles, he paused, his eyes finding Elara's. For a split second, the old narcissism flickered. "You'll never be free of me, Elara," he hissed. "You're a Rossi asset now. You just traded one cage for another." Elara didn't flinch. "No, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "I didn't trade cages. I built a new world. And you aren't in it." 3 months later, the dust from the controlled demolition of the Vance Harbor development had finally settled. The skyline was open, a gap where the death traps once stood, waiting for something better. Elara stood on the terrace of her new office, Vance Associates, Structural Integrity Specialists. The firm was hers, funded not by mob money, but by the whistleblower bounty she'd received for exposing the cartel's laundering scheme. A shadow fell across the blueprints on her table. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The scent of expensive tobacco and rain followed him everywhere. "The city council approved your new park design," Julian Rossi said, leaning against the railing. He wasn't wearing his tactical vest today, just a dark cashmere sweater that made him look almost human. "They liked the idea of a foundation that actually holds up. It's amazing what happens when you use real steel," Elara replied, finally turning to face him. Julian looked out at the city he still owned from the shadows. The Navarro cartel had been purged from the docks, their influence burned out by the fires Elara had helped him light. "The streets are quiet, Elara. Too quiet. My people are getting restless." "Is that a threat, Julian?" "It's an observation."